Hi, my name is Bhavya Kulshreshtha. I am a psychologist working with Children First in Gurgaon. Today, I'm collaborating with Stress Busters in order to answer some of your questions about toxicity in relationships. One of the most commonly asked questions is around what are the signs of toxicity in a relationship. And before getting into that, I thought it might be important to also look at the larger socio-cultural context that might be influencing our ideas about what relationships should look like. So, for example, gender roles, what are the kind of gender roles that society encourages, and how does that influence how we show up in a relationship? Other than certain people who are more likely to experience toxicity in a relationship than others. Are our perspectives about relationships also influenced by ideological frameworks such as, patriarchy or heteronormativity? And do these influence what kind of relationships might be considered toxic or not? Um, when we look at labels such as toxic, do we then create a template or a fixedness about what is true or what is possible for that relationship? A lot of times when we're looking at signs of toxicity, that may fall in line with the idea that we can measure the influence of toxicity in a relationship and use that measurement to then define the relationship as either toxic or not toxic. And this may not do justice to the entire variety of experiences that people have in relationships. So I'd like to invite you to think about the signs of toxicity a little bit differently. Maybe we could look at this in terms of the question, what in the relationship feels problematic for you? For example, if what you value about relationships is mutual respect and communication is being influenced by defensiveness or criticism, contempt or stonewalling of any kind, then it may feel like that value is being thwarted. Similarly, if someone is inconsistent in terms of their words and their actions, it may feel like your value of trust is being reduced in this relationship. Um, when someone is socially isolating you by deciding for you when you might be able to meet certain people, whom you can meet, when you can go, for how long you can go, and things like that, your value about equal distribution of power in the relationship, or your value of not conforming to controlling behavior may be being thwarted. Different ways in which our partner behaves can indicate to us that something about the relationship doesn't feel okay for us. These could also include other things such as lying, manipulation, gaslighting, extremes of experiences such as having positives that feel like they're really good and it's all up here, and then having lows that feel like extreme despair, distress, or difficulty. These kind of behaviors might indicate to us that something about the relationship is not okay. Another way to look at what might be problematic in the relationship is by tuning inward into how you might be feeling while you're in that relationship. Do you feel like you have the freedom to be yourself? Is there something about that isn't being met? Sometimes people have reported feeling exhausted in relationships that are um, being influenced by toxicity. They feel like they may not be supported, like they can't grow with a certain person, not feeling like the relationship is mutual, like it might be one sided or there might be uneven power dynamics. There may be feelings of anxiety or stress. Um, there may even feel like, there is a need to control your partner back because there is insecurity or there are these dynamics that feel out of control. Some people have also described what the relationship itself might feel like. Um, People feel like sometimes they might be walking on eggshells in the relationship, but they really have to watch everything that they say. Or it might feel like there are recurring cyclical fights that have no end or no resolution. Or it might feel like the relationship focus is all on the partner and not distributed with them, or their goals or their ambitions are not supported in this relationship. A second question that people seem to be curious about is what to do if you find that toxicity is operating in your relationship and coming in the way of what is precious to you. Here, I'd just like to say that I'm going to be sharing some experiences that people have found helpful, some things that they have reflected on. However, this does not mean that this will be the exact way that you choose to go about your exploration. And this is just a suggestion of what has worked for others. What might be best for you could look different as well. Awareness is one of the first things that people talk about. Becoming aware of how toxicity is operating in the relationship has allowed people to make more informed decisions about what their next steps might be. And many possibilities and choices are open to us. We may be told by society that there are only certain decisions that are the quote unquote right decisions, but there are many different ways that we could address this for ourselves. Um, we may start by reflecting on what is our idea of toxicity. What brought this to your awareness? Was it something that somebody said, or is it something that you were feeling? And is it possible for you to lean in a little bit deeper into that feeling and explore it? Um, how does toxicity operate in the relationship? What are the kind of tricks that it plays or the things that it introduces? What is toxicity convincing you of? When we start thinking about some of these things, perhaps it might help us understand what is best for us. The decision that a person makes about a relationship can depend on many factors, including where you're at. For instance, are you recognizing toxicity for the very first time? And are you understanding only now how it operates? Or is this something that you have tried to address in the past and you've been able to recognize and name it before? People may need to go through a variety of different experiences before coming to the decision that feels best for them, and this decision can change over time and with experiences. Sometimes decisions also may depend on the partner's response to concerns being brought up. The one situation that I might talk about where I'd be a bit more directive are situations of abuse. Any kinds of situations of physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, or financial abuse are situations that are extremely unsafe, and I would strongly encourage people to get help or get support in some way so as to be able to create safety or to leave the situation if that is what they choose to do or if that is possible. So please do reach out if a situation is starting to feel abusive for you. We will be linking some resources with this video for you as well. The third broad question was around what is the impact of toxicity in relationships. Broadly, the question centered around two things. One, what kind of emotional experiences can be expected and are normal in this kind of relationship or this kind of situation. And the second kinds of questions centered around people's sense of themselves. And I thought it might be important to maybe first list out what are the various things that can be expected by looking at other people's experiences that they've shared and maybe looking at what part of these might be applicable to you or might be something that you might be experiencing too. In terms of emotions, emotions like confusion, exhaustion, insecurity, anger, frustration, upsetness, isolation, overwhelm, grief, loss, anxiety, jealousy, all of these are extremely common emotions that people feel when toxicity is operating in their relationship. Um, these often lead to distress. These are often things that people want to influence or change in some ways. There are different suggestions on how to manage some of these feelings or reduce the intensity of them or reduce how often they come around to visit. But a lot of these feelings may be being generated by the operation of toxicity in the relationship, and therefore we may not be able to remove them entirely without addressing what's going on in the relationship itself. Another impact that toxicity has when it operates in relationships is on our sense of ourselves. It may make us question ourselves. So feelings of self-doubt or low self-worth might be common. It may make it difficult to concentrate on our everyday lives, which can have further impacts on our work or our sense of what our time is being used for, productivity. We may struggle or question our boundaries about why certain things might have been happening or what boundaries we might need to put down in the future. We might have questions about situations in terms of their reality, in terms of who was really to blame, what was it that really happened. It can lead to a sense of disorientation. It can lead to distressing thoughts, such as thoughts like "I'm not good enough." It may make, therefore, then the inner critic become a bit stronger, and the inner critic might try to induce shame or guilt in different ways. Um, Toxicity in relationships can kind of hijack the brain and make it difficult to concentrate. It may make difficult. It may create difficulty in decision making. It may create feelings of stuckness. Uh, it may cause disturbed sleep or even flashbacks about certain moments or conflicts in the relationship. All of these things, these emotions and these questions about our sense of ourselves, these are extremely common and valid reactions to toxicity. I can completely understand why, if someone was being influenced heavily by toxicity, they might experience some or many or all of these things. The fourth question was about how to invest in yourself and in healthier relationships, either during or after a relationship being influenced by toxicity has ended. And here are some of the things that people have found to be helpful. One of the few things that people talk about sometimes is acceptance in terms of what happened during the course of the relationship. Looking at the ways that we had shown up in the relationship, the ways that toxicity influenced us, the kind of values, hopes, or dreams that was thwarted during this relationship, and looking at them with a lens of acceptance of what happened, even if we are to recognize the injustice that we may sometimes feel. And as mentioned before, awareness is another thing that might help us, not just in understanding how toxicity operated, but also in recognizing it again in the future, and awareness of how we tackled it in the past and how we could use some of that previous collective wisdom should we ever encounter toxicity again. When it comes to our sense of ourselves, I encourage you to try to get to know yourself with a sense of curiosity. There may be parts of you that are just waiting to be rediscovered. Whether that was a hobby that you dropped, whether that was a passion that you weren't able to fully pursue, whether that was a work path or a work project that you really wanted to do, or some relationships that you want to build back up with friends, family, or people that you'd grown a bit distant from. Curiosity helps us understand the things that we value or the things that are meaningful for us. And when we recognize those, we are able to align ourselves with those things. And that can feel incredibly meaningful. We may also have to look closely and understand if we are experiencing any sense of shame. I know that a lot of survivors of abusive relationships or relationships where toxicity was operating significantly experience a lot of shame about what they feel they allowed to happen during that relationship, or the way that they reacted or didn't react in terms of standing up for themselves or maintaining certain boundaries. Um, and that kind of shame can really impact people in ways that are distressing. So when we're understanding shame, it's also important to look at self-forgiveness, to be able to know that we were doing absolutely the best possible in that given situation with the resources that were available to us can feel healing as well. I also encourage people to look at their sense of self outside of relationships and outside of the influence of toxicity. once again, in terms of the hopes or dreams or aspirations that they have for themselves, the kind of relationships that they wish to nurture in the future, what parts of them they would like to grow, the seeds that they would like to water that are linked back to what they want to experience. And when we come to looking at investing in relationships that feel more aligned with what we value, we may actually have to take from some of what I had recommended in terms of reflection earlier. So, if we've understood what it is that we value, would we want to look for a partner who resonates the same? If there were boundaries that were violated in the past, are these boundaries that we would now want to keep and protect closely in our future relationships? Often, when people are looking at investing in relationships, one of the things that they struggle with is being vulnerable in relationships again if they'd ever been taken advantage of in the past. Being vulnerable and trusting someone after having gone through an experience that was distressing or difficult um, can feel sometimes hard to do. And practicing small acts of vulnerability can really help deepen a connection with somebody. While I'm listing these points out, I'm really aware that they are very brief and they are only based on what people have told me has worked for them. So I would also really encourage that when looking at investing in yourself or in future relationships, you might want to choose to consult a therapist who could really look at the nuances of your story and your experience, who could really hold space for the complexity and variety of the emotions that you might have had, and would be able to guide you on how to best support yourself in your endeavors. You could also look at some self help books or videos, journaling prompts, or other activities that encourage self reflection, such as meditation or anything like that, that could help you really explore what it is that you're looking for, what it is that you value, and what it is that you're looking to invest in.